My husband had been dead for 9 days when my father-in-law arrived with a locksmith I didn't recognize and a toolbox I did. It was a Thursday morning. Daniel and I had a rule about Thursdays: no alarms, coffee made slow, curtains left closed until one of us finally gave in and got up to start the day. We'd kept that rule for 6 years. I hadn't slept past 5 since the hospital called, but I was still in bed at 7:15 because getting up meant starting another day without him, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. The knock came at 7:40. Robert Merritt was on my porch with a man holding a drill case and Daniel's red toolbox from the garage. I didn't ask how he'd gotten the toolbox. I stood in the doorway in yesterday's clothes and looked at both of them. Robert looked past me into the house. Not at me. Past me, at the walls and the floors and the crown molding Daniel had spent 2 weekends installing himself, measuring twice, swearing quietly, coming to bed late with sawdust on his forearms. He said, "I need you to let this man change the locks." I said, "What?" He said, "It's a security matter. Now that Daniel is gone, I need to make sure the property is protected." I heard the word property the way you hear a word, when someone means something different by it than you do. I had spent 7 years as a mortgage processor. I had handled hundreds of property transfers, deed filings, lien releases, title searches. I knew what a man meant when he stood on a porch that wasn't his and called it the property. I said, "I'll call you later today, Robert." I closed the door. "Stay with me, this one gets dark. I need to go back." Daniel had a heart condition he never took seriously enough. That is not an accusation. It is the kind of true thing you spend a long time after someone is gone turning over in your hands, asking yourself whether you said enough, pushed enough, made enough appointments. He was 41. He jogged. He cooked. He slept well. His cardiologist had told him 2 years earlier that his valve irregularity was manageable with monitoring and medication, and that it didn't have to define his life. Daniel took that to mean he was fine. He scheduled his checkups and took his medication and otherwise filed the information somewhere he didn't have to look at it often. He collapsed at work on a Tuesday afternoon. By the time I got to the hospital, the conversation had already shifted from treatment to something quieter. A doctor I'd never met spoke to me in a hallway, while a cart of linens was wheeled past behind him, and I kept watching the cart because looking at his face was too much. Daniel did not make it through the night. Robert and Carol arrived around 10. Carol held me and cried and didn't say anything. Robert stood near the window with his hands in his pockets and nodded at things the doctor said. On the drive home, alone, I sat in the hospital parking garage for 40 minutes before I could make myself drive. The house felt wrong when I got back. Not frightening, just wrong. Like a sentence with a word missing that you keep rereading. I had seen it before, the thing Robert did with his son. The particular way Daniel's posture changed when his father walked into a room, not afraid, exactly, just careful. The way he'd go quiet mid-sentence if Robert interrupted and wait for him to finish before trying again. The clearest memory I have of it is from Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Daniel mentioned at the table offhand that he was updating some paperwork on the house. Just estate housekeeping, he said. Robert set down his fork and looked at him and said, "What kind of updating?" Daniel said something about making sure everything was in order. Robert said, "In order for what?" The table went quiet. Daniel said, "Just in case, Dad," and changed the subject. Later, in the car on the way home, I asked him what that was about. He said, "Nothing. My dad just has opinions about property." I asked what kind of opinions. He looked at the road. He said, "The kind that are easier not to argue with at the dinner table." I let it go. I should have asked more. I understood that now. In the days after his death, Robert made himself useful. He made calls. He drove Carol to and from our house every day. He sat at the kitchen table and talked through practical things in the efficient way of a man who processed grief by managing logistics. I was grateful at first. He said, "You don't have to worry about the paperwork right now." He said, "I'll handle the property side of things." He said, "My son would want me to make sure you're taken care of." I signed what he put in front of me without reading closely. He asked about Daniel's laptop password and the filing cabinet key and whether Daniel had a safe deposit box at the bank. I answered. I was too tired to be careful, and I told myself that was okay, that Robert was family, that there was nothing to be careful about. Twice he asked about the deed to the house. The first time I said I thought it was in the filing cabinet. He said he would look into it. The second time, 4 days after the funeral, he said he wanted to make sure the title was clean so there wouldn't be complications with the estate. I said that was fine. I said I trusted him. That was the last thing I said to Robert Merritt that I wish I could take back. The shift came gradually, and then it didn't. He started saying this property and the family home in ways small enough that I second-guessed myself when I noticed them. He asked me twice about my next steps. He mentioned once that the house was a lot for one person to maintain. He came by one afternoon with his brother Gary, and they walked the house together talking about the roof and the HVAC and the square footage in the flat, a praising way of people thinking about what something is worth on the market. I stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Gary open the door to the second bedroom without asking. I told myself I was reading too much into it, that Robert was grieving in his own way. I wanted to believe that. On a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks after the funeral, Robert sat me down at the kitchen table. Carol wasn't there. He had come alone, which was unusual. He had a folder and he set it in front of him with his hands folded on top. He said, "Claire, I need to talk to you about the house." I said okay. He said, "Daniel bought this property before you were married, just his name on the purchase. You know that." I said yes. He said, "I've been looking into the title history, and I don't believe the deed change he intended was ever properly recorded, which means, legally, the property may still be titled in his name alone." I said, "He added me to the deed. I was there when we signed." He looked at me the way someone does when they've decided how much to explain. He said, "Wills can be complicated. And if the deed transfer didn't record correctly, this property would need to go through probate as part of Daniel's estate." I looked at the folder. He said, "I'm not trying to make this harder, but this land has been in our family a long time. Daniel understood what it meant to us. I think, if you're honest with yourself, you understand that too." I said, "What's in the folder?" He said, "Just some documents I've been reviewing. Nothing you need to worry about today." He came back 3 days later with a man named Phil who had a briefcase and a business card, and the specific tone of someone paid to sound reassuring. They laid 2 documents on the kitchen table, a property history, and a quitclaim deed already filled out with my name on the grantor line. Phil explained what it was. I let him talk. When he finished, I read the top of the page and then the legal description and then the signature block. Grantor transfers all right, title, and interest in the above-described property. I looked up. I said, "I'd like my own attorney to review this before I sign anything." The room changed. Not loudly. Robert's posture shifted in a way that was very clear. He said, "After everything my family has done for you, you're going to treat me like a criminal." I said I wasn't treating anyone like anything. I said I just wanted to review it first. Phil talked about timelines and estate complications. Robert said he was only trying to do what Daniel would have wanted. I picked up the quitclaim deed and did not hand it back. I said, "I'll be in touch." After they left, I sat in the same chair for a long time. Before we get to what happened next, if you're as shocked as I was, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a saga like this one. Now back to the story. If you like this story so far, put your location and current time in comments. I read all of those. Now back to the story. I knew what a quitclaim deed was. I had processed dozens of them. You sign one and whatever ownership interest you hold in a property moves from your name to someone else's. There is no warranty of title, no promise you owned anything in the first place, just a transfer of whatever you had. If you own nothing, it conveys nothing. If you own everything, it conveys everything. Robert had been very deliberate about the order. First, tell me I might not have an ownership interest, then present a document that would remove the interest he had just told me I might not have. I had processed enough files to know what that sequence was for. I went to the filing cabinet. I found the original purchase deed, Daniel's name only, as Robert had said. I didn't find a copy of the subsequent deed adding me to the title. I stood there for a moment. Then I thought about how Daniel organized things and went to the garage. He kept a plastic bin on the shelf above his workbench. He called it his redundancy system, which I always teased him about. He said redundancy was how you made sure nothing important got lost. The bin held tax returns, insurance copies, and a folder in his handwriting. House, recorded. Inside was a deed, both names, his and mine. Executed 2 years into our marriage, properly signed, stamped in blue ink at the top right corner, recorded, document number, date. Behind it was a property tax bill from the following year, listing both of us as owners. Behind that was a manila envelope. Daniel had written on the tab in his careful block print, the handwriting he used when something mattered. For CLAIRE, read if you need to. I sat down on the garage floor. I don't know how long I sat there before I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, folded twice, maybe 12 lines. He wrote, "I've been meaning to tell you about this for a while and kept putting it off. If you're reading this, I'm sorry. I should have made you sit down and go through all of this with me properly. I was avoiding a fight that wasn't going to happen in my lifetime, and that wasn't fair to you." He wrote, "The house is yours. I recorded the deed. Document number is on the copy in this folder. If anyone tells you otherwise, call the county recorder's office and ask them to pull it by document number. You can also call Jennifer Marsh at Stanton and Marsh in town. She has a copy. I emailed her when we redid the documents." He wrote, "My dad believes property belongs to blood. He has always believed that. I don't agree with him and I never have, but I also never had the courage to say it to his face. That was my failure, and I'm asking you to forgive me for it now." He wrote, "This house is ours. If I'm not here, it's yours. Don't let anyone tell you any different. I handled it. I love you." I read it twice. Then I folded it and held it in both hands. My husband had been gone for 3 weeks. He was still protecting me. The following Monday, I called Jennifer Marsh. She came on the line and said she was sorry about Daniel. She said she had been wondering when I would call. She confirmed the recorded deed. She confirmed the document number. She told me she had an email chain from Daniel asking her to prepare a memorandum of the transfer and retain a copy on file in case of any future dispute. She said he had been very clear that he expected a dispute. Then she said, "Mrs. Merritt, I received a notification from the county recorder's office last week. A deed was submitted for recording on this property approximately 11 days after your husband's death. I flagged it because it conflicted with the existing recorded title." I said, "What kind of deed?" She said, "A transfer deed, attempting to move the property to your father-in-law's name. The grantor's signature is listed as your husband." I said, "My husband was already gone when that was filed." She said, "Yes, I've submitted a conflict notice and the document is flagged pending review. I want you to go to the recorder's office yourself before we meet. Pull the document and look at it with your own eyes." I went 2 days later. The clerk set the filing on the counter, and I looked at it the way I had looked at thousands of documents over 7 years of work. The signature looked like Daniel's the way a photocopy looks like an original, close if you weren't trained, not close if you were. The legal description had a boundary error that matched a 2009 survey, not the current parcel. That told me whoever prepared it had pulled from an old file rather than ordering a current search. The date on the document was 11 days after the death certificate. I stood with that for a moment. An error in the legal description could be a mistake. A wrong date could be a mistake, but I kept reading. The notary line listed a name I didn't recognize from our area. I wrote it down. Then I looked at the mailing address for transfer confirmation. Robert Merritt, his address in Waverly. I set the document down on the counter. I looked at the address again. Not a copy going to Daniel. Not a copy going to an attorney or a title company. A copy going directly to Robert. I stood there, without moving for a moment. He hadn't been confused about the property. He had been counting on me to be. I photographed every page. On the drive home, I passed the coffee shop where Daniel and I used to go on Saturday mornings, and I had to pull over before I could keep going. The isolation started the same week. Daniel's cousin Bethany had texted me almost every day in the first 2 weeks after his death. Then one morning, I opened my phone and there was nothing new from her. I typed out a message and then deleted it. 2 days later, I opened our thread again. The last thing she had sent was thinking of you, love you, and the date on it was 18 days ago. I stared at it for a while. I started typing again and stopped. I was removed from a family group chat I'd been part of for 3 years. I noticed because a message came through, and when I went to reply, the thread was gone. Just gone, like it had never been there. Daniel's sister Meredith posted something online about people who use family grief to take what was never theirs. She didn't use my name. She didn't need to. I received a voicemail from one of Robert's oldest friends telling me I should be ashamed of myself, and that Daniel would be disgusted with what I was doing. I sat with my phone in my hand after that one for a long time. I knew what the records showed. I knew what the date on that filing meant. But knowing something professionally and feeling it hold steady at night are two different things. And at night, in the house that was too quiet, I had to keep returning deliberately to what was documented and what was real. The paperwork was clearer than the people. Carol called me once during this period. She was in her car, I think, that particular outdoor quiet on the line. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't been able to talk Robert out of it once he got something fixed in his head. I asked if she knew about the deed filed after Daniel died. The silence told me she did. She said, I should have said something sooner. I was afraid of what he would do. She said Daniel had told her years ago, after a bad argument with Robert about estate planning, that if anything ever happened to him, his father would try to undo what he'd set up. That he'd tried to make sure Robert couldn't. She said Robert had been furious when Daniel added my name to the deed. That he'd said no woman outside the bloodline should hold title to property that belonged to his family. Then she said something that stayed with me. She said, he filed that document 4 days after the funeral. I don't think he even waited to see what you were going to do. He just moved. 4 days, Daniel's suits were still hanging in the closet. The sympathy cards were still arriving in the mail. And Robert had already found a notary and prepared a transfer and walked it to the recorder's office. She said, your husband knew who his father was. He tried to protect you from it. I'm sorry I didn't. I thanked her. I didn't say anything else. Jennifer sent a formal letter to Robert. It outlined the recorded deed, the valid will, the conflicting filing, the date discrepancy, and the boundary error in the legal description. It requested he cease all further action related to the property and provide, within 14 days, documentation supporting the validity of the contested deed. He did not provide documentation. He called me instead. He said I was doing this to hurt the family. He said Daniel would be ashamed. He said the property had been in the Merritt name before I came along, and it should stay in the Merritt name after I left. I let him finish. I said, I'd like to continue this through our attorneys. Jennifer's office will be in touch. He said, you are not who my son thought you were. I said, I'll see you at the meeting. He came with an attorney I hadn't seen before. Not Phil, someone retained after the formal letter arrived. Jennifer and I were already seated when they came in. The manila envelope was on the table in front of me, the one with Daniel's handwriting on the tab. Robert sat down and looked at the documents Jennifer had arranged, the recorded deed, the conflict notice, the contested filing, the date comparison, the boundary error flagged in Jennifer's memo, and his expression moved through several things quickly. He said, you're turning a family grief into a legal fight over a piece of property. Jennifer said, Mr. Merritt, the document submitted to the recorder's office 11 days after your son's death carries your son's name as grantor. The date postdates his death certificate. His attorney said, "My client's position is that the document reflects his son's previously stated intentions regarding the property." Jennifer said, "The legal description on the submitted document contains a boundary error matching a 2009 survey, not the current parcel. The notary is not registered in this county. The mailing address for transfer confirmation is your client's home address." The attorney wrote something on his notepad. He didn't say anything. Robert looked at the table. He said, "He was my son. I raised him on that land. Everything he had came from this family." I picked up the manila envelope. I held it in both hands the way I had held it on the garage floor. I said, "Daniel left this for me, in case I needed it." I set it on the table between us. "He wrote it because he knew you would do this. He knew what you believed about blood and about who deserved to hold a deed. He made sure I would have what I needed anyway." Robert looked at the envelope. He looked at me. He said, "You were not his blood." I said, "No, I was his wife, and he chose that." Robert opened his mouth, and his attorney put a hand on his arm and said, "We'll need to take this under advisement and respond in writing." Robert sat back. His hands were flat on the table. He didn't say anything else. "Before I tell you how this ended, if you've made it this far, you already know the kind of person it takes to do what Robert did. Take a breath. If this story has meant something to you, subscribe so you never miss one. I put everything into these. Now let's finish it." The contested filing was formally rejected by the recorder's office 6 weeks later. The notary whose name appeared on the document was reported to the state licensing board. Jennifer said those processes take time and don't always end loudly. I don't know the full outcome. Robert received a cease and desist. He did not come to the house again. I changed the locks that week. I stood in the doorway and watched the locksmith work and thought about the morning Robert had arrived with one I didn't know and a toolbox that belonged to my husband. Some relatives apologized quietly, in the way people apologize when they went along with something that turned out to be wrong and don't want to examine why they did. Others never said anything. Meredith has not spoken to me since. I think about that sometimes, not with anger exactly, but with the particular sadness of understanding that some people decide what they believe before they look at what's true. Carol sent a card in the mail. Plain card, nothing printed inside. Her handwriting said, "I'm sorry I didn't speak sooner. I hope you stay in that house as long as you want to." I kept it. I still live here. Daniel's coffee mug is in the cabinet now. I moved it after about 2 months because leaving it on the drying rack had stopped feeling like keeping him close and started feeling like something else. His shoes are still by the door. I'm not ready for those yet. There are mornings when I sit at the kitchen table with my coffee, and the house is quiet, and I can almost feel the particular weight of a Thursday morning. The kind we used to have, curtains closed, no alarm, the day belonging only to us. I keep a copy of the recorded deed in the filing cabinet, a copy in my car, a copy in the cloud, and one at Jennifer's office. Daniel called it redundancy. He said redundancy was how you made sure nothing important got lost. He was right about that. He was right about more than he ever said out loud. What I've had a long time to think about is the difference between loving someone and believing you own what they built. Robert loved his son. I don't doubt that. But there is a kind of love that mistakes possession for protection, that cannot separate the person from the property, that looks at a widow and sees retrieval. He didn't come after the house because he needed it. He came because he could not stand that Daniel had chosen to give it to someone who was not blood. Someone who had come from outside the family and been handed something he believed could only move in one direction. Some people don't steal because they are desperate. They steal because they cannot tolerate another person holding a right they believe belongs only to them. Daniel understood that. He planned for it quietly, without telling me, because telling me would have meant admitting out loud what he believed his father was capable of. That was his failure, and he named it himself in 12 lines on a piece of notebook paper. I have the deed, I have the letter, I have the house. And on Thursday mornings, I still make the coffee slow.